Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Hey everyone, Joey here, and today I'm joined by Megan Farison, who is a music educator, a writer, and the author of Dissonance, a memoir that doesn't let you look away from how deep some wounds can run, even when we don't really talk about them all that much. And in this conversation, we're getting real about the partnerships between teachers and students, and thinking about how trust is built, how boundaries matter, and what happens when even collective trauma shows up at your school. So I'm so grateful that Megan's here to help us through some of these thoughts, and let's go ahead and dive right into it. Megan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about all the things we're going to talk about. Thank you for doing this show.
It's a true pleasure of mine. And I was just saying to Megan before we began that I had just spent my week reading her memoir, Dissonance, leading up to this conversation and listening to it as an audiobook in public throughout New York City. The different looks in my face throughout the week were just, oof. It was shock, it was horror, it was poignant, it was anguish, but it was also a hint of resilience in coming forward with Megan's story. And we're going to have a link to that in the show notes for those who wish to learn more. And Megan, I wanted to start our conversation today by thinking about student safety and healthy boundaries. You mentioned in your text on page 47, actually, for those who go back and reference it, you said, as a teacher, I never needed a class to tell me I shouldn't have romantic relationships with my students. It was instinctively clear the power I held over students in the classroom. I knew I had the potential to raise them up or tear them down. I knew it was my job to be a role model, not an object of romantic affection. If a student even looked at me a certain way, as if they might have feelings for me that went beyond respect, I added caution to my behavior because I remember the feeling of being a teenager with a crush on her teacher, and I didn't want to do anything to encourage those feelings. So, this first question speaks to all educators out there who really try and go the extra mile to let their students be seen, valued, and heard, especially for those students who find themselves in dark places and those teachers everywhere. We appreciate all the advocacy that you do. And as teachers, we know that our situations can be very precarious when, even though we have these genuine and innocent actions to, dare I say, rescue a child who may be going through a lot of struggles. And the act of trying to rescue the child may come off as sometimes even publicly misconstrued. And I too was an educator who used to have my classroom designed as that safe space during lunch for children who either found themselves alone or in one instance, I had a child who was eating in the bathroom and I invited them into my classroom as well for safety, because to me it was a safety issue. How could you allow that to go unnoticed as a school staff member? So I wanted to begin for Megan by just challenging that or observing that deeper and thinking about what are some ways that educators everywhere can really pay attention to student safety while maintaining healthy boundaries within their classrooms and their practices.
Thank you for that question. So it's multi layered and can be very complex, but I think that what it comes down to is that you have to balance what resources you have as a teacher. You can't give everything to one kid. And there are many reasons why you shouldn't do that, right? But you're a teacher of many. You have many souls in your classroom, and you have to figure out a way to balance the energy that you're giving to each student. And that doesn't mean there's a difference between, what do they say, equity and equality.
Mhm.
That, yes, there are going to be times when you are going to give more attention to one student than another for a myriad of reasons. But you always have to both be looking at your students as individuals, but also as the whole. Think like you're a shepherd of a flock, right? To be a
Mhm.
little bit biblical, right? But you are, this is your flock, and your job is to take care of them. And even before you take care of their minds in the sense of pouring information into them, you are caring for their mind in that you are protecting it from harm as best as you can. That your job ultimately is that when that student or those students leave your room, that they will have not incurred trauma because of you,
Mhm.
because of actions. And I will be very transparent in saying that we are not perfect. And there will be times when I think we will cause trauma and not mean to.
Agreed.
I'm thinking of a very specific story. It was in my first teaching job. So it was probably I'm thinking maybe my third or fourth year of teaching. And I was doing an audition. I was alone with a student doing a voice audition for the following year's ensembles. And she said to me, Mrs. Farison, why do you hate me? And I was so shocked by this. And you know how the brain can sort of amplify things. So it's possible she said, why do you not like me? Right.
Right.
But it felt so, because I loved this student. She was amazing. She was so smart. She showed up every day and she did exactly what she was supposed to do. And that's why she went under the radar,
Mhm.
because oftentimes we tend to have our attention pulled by the extremes, by the kids that are very extroverted and they're raising their hand a lot and they're participating a lot. And then you have the students on the other side that are maybe disrupting the room. And so you're like building up these and you're trying to build up these kids over here and get that so that everything works. And sometimes we miss the kids in the middle that are just showing up every day and doing the thing every day. And it really was eye opening for me that as a person who has incurred trauma and for most of her life has lived in the extremes, that has had a hard time living in the middle, it's interesting looking back and realizing that those are the students that I missed. At least with that one, I know that I did, that I could have done better by her. I was so glad that she said something to me because it gave me an opportunity to have dialogue with her and to say, oh my goodness, no, I care about you so much, and to validate her feelings at the same time, though. And there was an opportunity there, right? I mean, already she was having these negative feelings, and whether you can put that in trauma or just very negative impact. Trauma is something that stays with you, right? And lasts, and who knows how that could affect her. But she gave me an opportunity to try to heal that a little bit, to try to help her to process that. So it's a tough thing. Like I said, there's so many sort of directions my mind can go in about this. But as far as balancing taking care of your students and you want to care for them, but you also want to respect boundaries.
I want us to consider, how then do we meet those students in the middle? Not everybody wants to come to school and build a partnership with their instructors. They just want to come, do the job, and leave. So for those that really do have that desire to just respectfully, by choice, just show up and get the job done, how can we still include them and meet them in the middle and help level the equilibrium?
This is a really interesting question. You're really challenging me today, Joey, because honestly, my first response when you said there are those kids that just want to show up, they want to do the work, and they want to leave, my gut reaction was let them.
Mhm.
Respect them, care
Right.
for them, the way that you make sure your children, their basic needs are met.
Yeah.
When we talk about the hierarchy of needs, there are kids that only need the foundation. You are providing a stable environment in which they can learn and do their thing and then leave and go on to the next thing. Then I think that is okay.
And I love how you do mention just that need to feel safe and supporting that as educators. So I'm going to say what educators probably think, but don't really vocalize. That's what this platform is for, to say what they're thinking. I would say to meet students in the middle is significantly easier at the college level where I teach, because they're paying to be there. They're old enough to make that choice. Where
Mm.
we actually joke in my classes where we have the core and then we have the background actors. And if you want to be a background actor, That's fine. You're still paying the same tuition as everybody else. Whatever outcomes you want at the end of the semester, that's on you. And I'm still going to walk out in December or May or July and proceed into my next term.
Hmm.
And that's that. At the K-12 level, I think the challenges and the stakes are significantly higher because the student cannot advocate for themselves at that age, meaning there's the state tests, there's my job on the line if I'm a K-12 educator, there's leadership, there's their parents, and there's a lot more armor that that student is working with that puts me in a position in terms of for me to succeed in my job and even, dare I say, keep my job, I have to kind of force that student to move away from the center and make them become more than just feeling safe. They have to actually engage in the routines. They can't spectate the class like they would want to because spectating is safe for them. We have to do more than that in K-12. College, no problem. That's fine. Especially in lecture halls with 300 students, you're expected to do nothing more than that. But at K-12, there's so much more. And especially for those educators, I'm wondering what skills we can offer them because truthfully, I'm not sure what they are.
Hmm. Well, I think if we had like the answer, we could sell it for a lot of
Yeah.
money. Okay, but I will say when you're speaking, do you know, it is so interesting because again, we see everything through the narrative of our own life, of our own
Right.
experiences. So when I was saying that they show up, they do the thing, and that makes them feel safe, because I have always been a high achiever, my idea of what showing up and doing the thing and feeling safe is engaging.
Right.
We want to be pushed and challenged. I'm saying, well, it's not that I don't want to engage the kids that are just showing up and doing the thing. In my mind, through my narrative, through my own eyes, is those are kids like me. Because I mean, yes, I was class president and I did these things, but doing the thing is engaging. I think that's because as a teacher, I have the expectation that you will engage, that I won't let you just sit there and not be seen. And so I guess that's just my standard. My base level standard is that you are not going to get to sit to the side and not be cared about. You're going to show up and you're going to get it to be a part of the team. And teachers have different ways of approaching this, but I definitely removed some students, and I don't mean permanently from my class, but if there was a conflict, I've taught in rural schools, urban, inner city, and I've had to figure out sometimes I have to remove a student from the environment for safety reasons just because it's disrupting the learning environment. And as best as I can help it, I make sure to speak to that student at the end. Like I said, if you have the ability to move that student to a safe space and say, I want to talk to you at the end of class. And then you go back, you do your thing. And at the end, you have this opportunity to model forgiveness.
Right.
And so, where some people may avoid that, I can look back on this and I can really see where kids really turned in a different direction because number one, I held them accountable. I cared enough to hold them accountable. I said, just like I was talking about on Leslie's podcast, you have to set not only the routines, but you have to also make your students aware of here's our system of accountability. If you do this, this is how I'm going to react. If you do this, this is the consequence, so that you're not living in this unknown of what's going to happen. So, first off, I have a student who knows the expectation. And I'm thinking of a middle school girl right now. And I love middle school students. They're amazing and they're just, it's a beautiful age. And she just was very distracted and wasn't following expectations. And I had to remove her from that environment. And in this particular case, she went down to the office and waited. And I went down there and I sat next to her. I didn't stand over her. I
Right.
mean, the way that we are, right? And physically, the way we position ourselves with students matters. We want to give them
Yes.
space and be respectful. but I didn't want to be towering over her, looking down at her while she sat in this chair in the office. So I gently sat down next to her. And I think I asked her a question. I said, "What's going on? How are you doing?" And she started to tell me that she was having some challenges at home and started to open up about some things. Nothing that was like really traumatic, but just things that kids are dealing with. And so I listened to that. And then I always make sure to tell these kids that I remove and then I go talk to, I want you to be there. Your presence matters. So let's try again. And because they may not get that at home, they may do something at home and the parent yells at them or punishes them, and there is no talk after it that is loving and gentle. And so, just basic human decency in that regard. And then, so many times I've seen that where that the kid then shows up and it is different and they know you care and they feel they're a part of something. It doesn't always work that way, but more times than not, when I went out of my way to talk to a student and to be very clear about that they matter and I want them there, but I have to respect boundaries just as they do. I have to follow through. I've watched it do some pretty awesome things.
And as I'm thinking about a conversation that is going to be on our podcast with Nathan Ray, who says that one of the ways to actually bring students from that middle is through those micro moments. And he says a micro moment is taking time to connect with the student in terms of, oh, you're wearing a certain sports jersey today. You like that team? Tell me about your connection with them. Or what Nathan said, that his sophomore English teacher called all the parents before the school year began and asked, what does your child like? They like Michael Jackson? Okay, I'm going to have a Michael Jackson poster in my room. They like the Mets? He didn't say the Mets, but I'm not a sports person. So I'll just say they like the Mets. Okay, they can write a paper about that through one of our topics coming up. They can make a connection through that way.
Mhm.
And those micro moments and connecting to students through what they appreciate as part of their everyday likes can keep their interest and draw them in as being a citizen in your classroom. I think that's the
Mhm.
answer, Megan, to bring them away from the middle, to have connect with them through those micro moments. And I think in addition to having stability and routine in the classroom, I also wonder, how can we use micro moments yet still be safe in doing so?
This reminds me, I just took a first aid for mental health training for youth.
Yeah.
It's cool how they unite those two things together. Mental health first aid, right?
Yes.
How do you provide first aid to a student who is struggling in some way? And with micro moments, we can maybe sometimes feel overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, it's going to be so hard to connect. What do I do? I have to do something special. And there's that idea, there's research that supports that one adult in a youth's life can be the difference between whether they're resilient and they're not. And I would say the same thing about micro moments is that just as one moment can break a kid, one moment may be all it takes for them to feel like they noticed me.
Yeah.
So, how do you notice a kid, right? In an appropriate way?
Mhm.
Well, clearly through the lens of the classroom, making sure that you are verbally validating when your students speak. So, if you're having a discussion in the classroom and you choose a student, they raise their hand. And I would sometimes choose students that weren't raising their hand. I would look around the room and I would see who I could maybe ask, but I'm careful to put students on the spot because I can do that when I feel like they're comfortable with me. And once I know they feel safe in the classroom, that I can start to pull them out of that comfort
Right.
zone.
And invite them into the dialogue.
Yeah, and invite
Right.
them in. And if they say, oh, I don't know, and they clam up, I don't then push. I may wait. And again, it's all dependent on the situation, on the day, on the student, but you have to read that student's body language. Or they hide it? What are they doing? What do you know about the student? It's a lot of information to balance. But ultimately, what is more important in that moment, that you just yank that answer from that student or you assess the situation, which is the first thing you do. We talked about this in the mental health first aid is you're
Mhm.
assessing, you're constantly assessing the situation.
Yeah.
Is how is the student reacting when I invite them into the dialogue? And maybe we just add yet to this. They're not ready yet.
Yes. Agreed.
And I would also, like if I had a student, I would use that as an opportunity in a more private moment because if I know that student didn't want to say anything out loud in front of people, I may find a moment as they're leaving the classroom or maybe even the next day when they're coming in to say, like, hey, that was okay that you didn't answer. Let's try again. And what are you feeling about that? It's always an opportunity to open up this dialogue to learn more about them. And then maybe you try again down the road. But there are some students that will never feel comfortable being called on. And one of the, I think, mistakes we make as educators, or even the way we look at leaders, is that leaders are extroverted, leaders are charismatic
Yes.
and boisterous, and leaders stand out among the crowd. And that's not how everybody leads. And it isn't how everybody learns. People learn differently.
And our
So,
teachers also can be I'm a very introverted person. I thrive in the classroom, but I am very awkward in social settings.
so how would you, Joey, then you tell me through your lens, if we're doing an activity, how would you modify or meet the need of a student like you who feels more introverted, but you still want to have the opportunity to express yourself or participate? How would you vary that or modify where everyone has an ability to come to the table?
Absolutely. And I'm going to have to model that in practice in about 3 hours at 3 o'clock today with my Monday class. And
Awesome.
what I do is that I form my classes in a circle-like setting, meaning that we are in a scenario where we should be able to see and validate each other. I want to set up my classroom in a way that allows everybody to, again, be seen, validated, and heard. I think those are the three pillars that can really help any classroom for a student to be seen, validated, and heard. And my classes are very discussion oriented. You will highly unlikely see coming from me a multiple choice exam, right? Or even a short answer quiz. I'm all about here's the conversation, and let's write about the conversation for your written work. And your grade is pretty much contingent on either how you speak your way through the conversation or reflect about it if you didn't choose to share.
Mm.
And what I do is because again, I'm a humanities instructor, so I have all my students sit around and I let them share first. Sometimes it is the same two or three voices. That's fine. But I will never single a student out, but I will absolutely single a group of students out. I'd be like, okay, so Ben, Sarah, Liam, da 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 da, you 10 have not had a chance to share yet. Do any of the 10 of you have
Mm.
anything that's on your mind to contribute? And that's how I don't ask them a question directly, but my question is, tell us anything that may be on your mind at this second, anything that you want us to know that you're thinking about right now in this moment.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
it leaves it very open for them. And if not, I did my job. I invited them into the conversation and I'll say, okay, thanks for letting me know. If you change your mind or if something comes up, we're here and we're able to listen to you. And I leave it as an open invitation going
Mm.
forward for them.
I really love that. I've never heard that approach before where you call out, okay, so. We haven't heard from you. And so you're not just saying one person's name, you say it, but
Mhm.
you say all these other people and they feel
I
like
say about
we're
10
in a
people at a
group.
time.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we're in a group. That is lovely. That is lovely.
So growing up, I was validly identified by my closest teachers as a separatist, and my twin brother had a much easier time than me making friends, and I typically would find comfort in eating alone, quite frankly, not being bothered, and other than the smallest circle of close peers that you can possibly imagine, I truly saw my teachers as my true comrades during my time in K-12. I visited their rooms at 7:15 in the morning before the first bell at 7:30, and I'd often spend lunches in the rooms with them as well, and even stick around for maybe 20 or so minutes after the seventh period dismissal bell to just pack up slowly and chat with them. And if anything, I found this to be humanizing. And it's likely for those reasons that I went forward with the paradox of wanting to become a teacher, despite the fact that when I was the age of a student, I felt so disconnected to other kids and frankly didn't like kids. And it's because of how I connected to teachers that I went forward with this profession. So, as a teacher, I've always seen myself as someone who was present, and my first year students would also attest to the fact that I was also willing to offer my classroom as a safe space to those who may have a need for it. And I mentioned this on a couple segments, maybe even yours as well, Megan, that one of the things that really got me into trouble as a first year teacher was that I thought it was my job to keep my students safe, period. I was that last resort to keep my students safe, and there was nothing beyond me because I knew that the school psychologist would respond differently than me in a way that maybe would not get the best help for that child in crisis.
Mm.
What I did not know was no matter what I felt or how the bureaucracy worked, it was only my job to keep my students safe, comma, for now. And no matter what I saw within the system, I had to abide by that and follow that protocol in order to keep my job and succeed in my job the way that I was able to. So then, Megan, with that, what are some general norms that you can share with us about practicing safety within the classroom as an educator?
You want to start with what are your school's policies. But I am not that person that's going to tell you you can never hug a student. You
Right.
can never put your hand on a student in a supportive way. It comes back to intention, right? Is there a reason for you to do that? Is there a pure intention there? So if you have a student that you really think would benefit from having space, like your safe space, your classroom becomes a safe space
Mhm.
during lunch. My husband actually, he has students that, like a group of them that like to hang out in the choir room or whatever during lunch. And there's a group of them, it's not just one. But even so, if my husband was going to be in a classroom with just him and another student, you have to make sure that a situation like that is easily observable and easily interruptible. And I'm stealing this from the Elephant Alliance, which is an
Yes.
organization that their whole mission is to prevent educator sexual misconduct. And so these two women, Mackenzie Bufus and Patty Sampson, incredible women that have, I think they're in the same camp, is that they're not going to tell you you can never, because that is unrealistic in some ways. For some teachers, fine. And I respect that. But if you're going to have a student in your classroom, you have to be aware of what are the optics of that. You want to create space between you. Fine, they can be there, but they are not sitting at your desk.
Mhm.
They're not near you. And if you're going to speak to them, make sure that you still, even though it's just you and that student, you're maintaining professional demeanor. So it's have a student in your room, but be transparent. Tell people. Go down and say to your principal, say, hey, I've got this student and here's the situation, and I really want to be a safe space for them, but I
Mhm.
want you to know what's going on so that
Mhm.
if anybody comes to you or this is my plan, they're going to always sit here. I'm always going to be at my desk or whatever. But it comes down to transparency.
What if you go down to leadership and say, hey, the student needs a safe space, and they shrug their shoulders like it doesn't matter, who cares?
Well, you have to be careful, like you said, right? Is that you got to know school policy. I would start asking questions. I wouldn't just leave it at that. You don't want to push and then create conflict because at some point you do have to respect. If your administrator is telling you you shouldn't do this and you think that it's a reasonable request for whatever reason, okay, well then how else can I help that student? What resources can I give them? If they can't be in my room, okay, if that's the rule. But part of that mental health first aid is we assess the situation and we provide support and information. So if we can't provide the support of our classroom for whatever reason, what can we provide as support? What information can we give? Maybe there's a number, like a hotline or something that they can call, and you can say, hey, if you want to talk to somebody, there's this number, but you have to gauge that. Again, does that seem fair to say that you just have to find how else to support them I would not, though, recommend just saying to your administrator, like leaning into that and going and creating that conflict, because then what happens is it's going to create conflict and then drain you of energy that you need to be able to give to other students too. If you're going to go to bat for a student, you still, what is that like? You can catch more flies with honey. If the administrator doesn't seem to understand, maybe continue the dialogue a little bit or say, hey, could we talk about this a little bit more? And if they say no, and I know this is so difficult, but you do have to respect it unless there's something that there's like a safety issue that you have to report, which, by the way, I learned this from the Elephant Alliance as well, that when you look at the hierarchy of reporting, where the ball gets dropped is at the administration level. Because what they do is they start to fear what's going to happen if this information gets out. And then they go, well, we're just going to deal with it in house. But you have a responsibility as a mandatory reporter to report that to an authority, whether that's like the Department of Child Services, whether that's the police, but you have to do something. So in that case, if you're going to an administrator and you're expressing that you have a major concern and they're dismissing the concern, well, maybe that is a fight you need to get into. Because if that administrator is doing that to you, who else have they done that to? Who else are they ignoring? The needs of, I mean, that's a bigger issue, right? And this goes, we have an accountability problem in our country. It's just, we all have to work together to agree that accountability is the way to go. It's not punishment. I'm not trying to punish you, but we're so busy with being like, we want our children to be successful. We want to be successful that we're missing that we should really be trying to get our children through childhood, teaching them resilience and not putting them into situations where they're going to incur major trauma. You can't always do that. But what I'm saying is we're so busy wanting our kids to be great achievers that I think sometimes we can completely forget that their mental and emotional health has to come first, who they are, so that they don't base their value on what they do, that they have value as they are.
Which goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think the greatest takeaway that we can gain from that is just knowing that there's ways that we can allow and include all students to follow through with the idea of safety and what that means. And as educators, we have a responsibility to practice that. And something else that I would advise other educators to do is that if you have an administration that is resistant to assisting and maybe dropping the ball on their level, what I learned to do at one point is to form a village of colleagues. If I saw that there was a student in crisis, but I knew that there were other faculty who were aware of the student's needs and the student got along well with those faculty members, I would let them know what my observations were. Hey, I'm aware that this student is struggling with A, B, and C. I think it's between just my own knowledge, so please keep it confidential. But if you could be another pair of eyes and just a watchdog for the student, please do so. If I'm her second period and if you're her fourth period, check in on her at that point of the day. Hey, how are you feeling? Do you have a safe space to go for lunch other than, let's say, the bathroom? Sixth period, okay. You're the sixth period teacher. Do you mind checking on her before the bell rings and it's after school? Make sure that she has a safe space to go after school before she heads home. It's just having other watchdogs during the day to form a village, I find to be safer than leaving one teacher accountable for a student.
Mm. My therapist will say to me, what are your options in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And you just offered up a great option, right? It may be helpful to write out what are my options. Again, I'll go back to the administrator,
Mm-hmm.
that you start here. Here are my options. And then if they ignore here, I'm going to this level. I'm going to go to this level. And this may be a really hard pill to swallow, but sometimes it will cost you your job.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make what you did wrong. Because if you know that you were doing the right thing, if you were in the face of injustice, you suffered. When you set fear aside and you only think about, if I wasn't afraid, what would I do? And you come from a place of love and caring for people, if you suffer for that, that's just part of it.
It
And
is. and like it is what it is, and that becomes a form of justice through the injustice.
Right. Well, and you may leave that environment, but you will have planted a seed in that
Mhm.
environment. Even if nobody's listening and this whole thing happens, you lose your job, it doesn't mean that you haven't made a difference. And that impact years down the road, when another teacher maybe has the same issue and they think back to the other teacher that was let go or for whatever reason, and they're like, we need to do this differently this time. So you never know how that can affect you. And of course, it is your choice. In the end, it is always your decision how you want to deal with things. I just want people to know that they aren't alone if by trying to do the right thing, they suffer greatly because of it. And if and when you do, to be able to pick yourself up, knowing that you did the best that you could, that you can sleep at night, you can be at peace with yourself because you did right by you and your values. And then you try to find whatever faith you can, whether that's in God or whatever, the universe, any way you want to say that. And you hold on to that and you say, I had a purpose in that situation. And now I'm in a new situation. And now I'm going to look for what next and try to look back on that other chapter with what gratitude you can and what lessons you can carry through with you. But it's okay. The worst thing you may think, I'll lose my job. That's the worst thing that could happen. And you may feel like that was the worst thing and it may happen. But I'll tell you what, you're going to wake up the next morning and you're going to keep going. And you have no idea how your life may unfold in this even more incredible way.
It reminds me of one of my favorite Hollywood movies on teachers, Dead Poet Society,
Mm,
where we have Robin Williams as John Keating, who's trying to do the right thing as a teacher by letting his students think freely, not really thinking against the system, but just being a free thinker. And one of his students who comes into combat with his parents because of his thinking, he wants to be an actor, and his parents say, no, you will become a doctor, you will do ABC. And he says, well, I'm thinking freely. I just want to be an actor. That causes conflict, which ends in the student losing his life by suicide. And unfortunately, the teacher is to blame, and Keating is ousted. And I made a verb out of that to say, oh, that person got Keating. But you
mhm.
see, when he leaves his classroom, the amount of other students that he has influenced in his time was incredible. He told them on their first day of class, call me your captain. Oh, captain, my captain, call me captain. And as an ode to his time at Welton Academy, the students stand on their desks and salute their captain as he walks into the way the camera has it, he's walking out into the light. So it's like he's finding a happy beginning somewhere else. But in doing so, he's also touched the lives of many students in his building. So to educators everywhere who may have had those bureaucratic incidents, just trust your intuition that you did the right thing at that time.
Mm. And nothing is all good or all bad.
Right.
And we do not
Exactly.
have control over those things. It is sad, isn't it? I'm just glad you brought that up because that is a tragic thing, right? Is that by freeing that student and making him feel like he could think freely and he could be something else because he was trapped, he wasn't living, right? I sort of call these things like a ticking time bomb, where at some point something is going to happen. If it wasn't then, it could have been later.
Yeah.
But just because, again, not everything is all good or all bad, think about your intention and did it come from a place of love? All you can do is do the best that you can do. And if you see injustice, stand up and speak out about it.
And using this podcast is a platform to speak out about that, in addition to a 300-page dissertation. So there's that.
Love it. Love it.
So, Megan, I wanted to come to a conclusion for our conversation, asking you to talk to us about dissonance. What is it and why? And what from this conversation have we not yet touched on that we still want our listeners to know?
I started writing Dissonance during a crisis in my life. I was in the darkest season of my life. I hope I never have a darker season than this. And I wrote it as a way to save myself. And through helping other people, my hope was that by sharing my story, that by helping other people who I knew were going through similar things, that was making me better. That was healing me. My book Dissonance has themes of grooming and educator sexual assault and abuse because I was groomed by my high school band director. And then that turned into a sexual relationship. And when I look back on the whole thing, I'm sure that the grooming began before then. And the story begins in April of 2019 when I found out that my high school band director had been arrested. And it really changed the trajectory of my life. It was very traumatic. I was 33 years old at the time. I'd been married for about 10 years. I had two young boys, and I thought I had life figured out pretty good. New job, new home, things are going really well. And in an instant, my whole life just turned upside down. And so I don't need to get in too much into the weeds of this because there's so much to this story, so many different things about it. But it was my way of piecing together my past and how my past led to what ended up happening in my adulthood, how my young life was impacting my adulthood, even in ways that I didn't even know. And the thing that I'm really proud of it, I just want to say, and you know this too, Joey, right? When you think about your dissertation, I
Yes.
mean, you have worked your butt off to do it, to get it done. And it is just, I poured everything I had into that. I gave up so much time from my family, and they gave it to me willingly because it was what I needed. My husband was so supportive through this. And actually, he came up with the title of the book because I told him at some point, I said, okay, I know the book. I want it to be one word, and I want it to be a word that has meaning in both psychology and music because I was dealing with both of those things. You got the music teacher aspect, but also this mental health issue. And one day my husband said, I've got it. I know what your book's going to be called. It's going to be called Dissonance. And I said, you are a genius. That is awesome. So I'm very proud of it. And I'm so touched by the conversations I've had with people who have read the book and have come to me and shared their own stories or just connected with me in some way. And it is a dual timeline structure. So that means that it is constantly, or every chapter, it is alternating between the present and the past. So you are getting an opportunity to see how what happened in the past is now affecting the future and how all those things piece together. And I hope that it inspires people to look at their own life in the same way. Back to what you were saying earlier about bringing trauma into the classroom. How do we not let that happen? I encourage anyone to go back and don't be afraid to look at your past with honesty and compassion and to see how what's happened in your childhood and not to blame. You can say, yes, that's the reason that I feel this way. But also, if you're talking about a parent, yes, my parent acted this way. I can still love them. They did the best that they could at the time. Or maybe they didn't, and I'm going to deal with that. But either way, you're dealing with it. You're not ignoring it and avoiding it. I could go on and on about the book. I just want people to buy it and experience it. And so, why do you think people should read this book?
Thank you so much for asking that, Megan. I was actually going to offer that as a comment as well. Dissonance is going to stick with me for quite some time because it's enabling me to reflect on my opening practices as an educator who, again, took on that role as that therapist and keeping students safe. Again, not safe, comma, for now, but just thinking I was keeping them safe, period. And reading Dissonance allowed me to transparently acknowledge the, I'm going to use a word that I think best fits it. It allowed me to think about the threat that it looks to a leadership team when you have one educator who is trying to behave in a way that they feel is going to protect other students around them, and what that means when they are moving forward with their own pedagogy and their own styles in a way that may go outside the box that other teachers may be willing to handle and carry. That could even be something as, honestly, my first year teaching, I wouldn't mind writing back to an email at 4 a.m.
Hmm.
If a parent wrote me at 3:58, I was on, and I'll write them back by 4. And
Wow.
it taught me, yeah, that's how bad my sleep cycle was. And I go to bed and wake up at 6:30 and believe I could do it again the next day.
Mm.
And it made me reflect and think about certain behaviors that I was told to correct and why it was important for me to do so instead of thinking, well, no, this is my routine and this is what gets me to and from work. So I should stick with this. And it taught me what it really meant to be a safe educator.
Hmm. Yeah, you do get to hear my teenage self, my thoughts from my teenage perspective. And I think it does sort of open that door for, oh my gosh, teenagers can think this way about this. Well, yes, we can,
Mhm.
yes, we can. So thank you for that awesome endorsement of my book.
No, I highly endorse. And as first opening your teachers as well, as you start to become seasoned, of course, our practices are always adjusting. And I believe it's true when they say you don't really have it figured out till year 3. And it's almost like I'm not a parent, but I would imagine in being a parent, nothing comes with a manual. And I think what Dissonance has reminded me is that we need to be fluid in our practices as educators and accept what does and what does not work and choose the practices that will keep us protected as educators in order to ensure our students are safe, for now. That's my endorsement on Dissonance. Megan, do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share with our listeners for today?
I just want to say that it's okay to not be perfect. It's the wanting to be better, right? So we're not going to be perfect, but it is that desire to grow and to learn and to also be able to forgive yourself when it's not perfect. And I just so thankful for the work you're doing, Joey. It's so great.
Likewise.
And I feel very honored to have had a chance to speak on this platform. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Megan. And to echo Megan's sentiment, I definitely would love to see our viewers have a discussion with us about dissonance when you have a chance to read it in our show notes. Megan is transparent. She shares her soul with you through her text, and I definitely feel like I'm like a part of her family after reading it because I know all her different members. And I think one takeaway that I've also gained as an educator from reading the text is that we need to try to keep our students protected, but we also need to forgive ourselves for what we don't know and what we can't know, and still allow ourselves to have resilience as classroom teachers, despite the circumstances we deal with every day. So, Megan, I wanted to again thank you for sharing your soul with us and for reminding us that classrooms aren't sealed off spaces. We carry what we carry, whether we say it out loud or not. And if you do want to dive deeper, again, Dissonance is out there and it's a powerful read. So take care of yourselves, and we'll see you all next time on the podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.